She signed the marriage papers with shaking hands, and the ink wasn't even dry before she realized she had made the biggest mistake of her life. A man she had never met. A ranch she had never seen. A life she could never have imagined. But here is the part nobody tells you. The penniless cowboy she married was hiding something so enormous, so carefully buried, that when the truth finally came out, it didn't just change her life. It shattered everything she thought love was supposed to mean. Stay with us, because this story is only just beginning. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Lily Bennett was standing at the kitchen sink of her sister's house in Ohio, scrubbing a pot that had been sitting too long when her sister walked in and dropped an envelope on the counter without a word. Lily dried her hands slowly. She already knew what it was. She had been waiting 3 weeks for the reply. She opened it carefully like something fragile was inside. Dear Miss Bennett, your application has been accepted. Mr. Caleb Anderson of Hartwell County, Wyoming has agreed to the arrangement. Travel arrangements will be provided. Please prepare to depart within 14 days. 14 days. Lily read the letter twice. Then she folded it along its original creases and slid it into her apron pocket. Her sister was watching her from the doorway with an expression that was half pity, half judgment. You're really doing this? I already said I was. You don't know this man, Lily. I don't know anyone here either. Lily turned back to the sink. At least out there I have a reason to stay. Her sister didn't answer. Because there was nothing to answer. They both knew the truth. Lily had nothing left in Ohio. No money, no prospects, no future that didn't involve living in her sister's spare room for the rest of her life, slowly shrinking into someone she didn't recognize. The arrangement was simple, legal, and completely transactional. A rancher in Wyoming needed a wife who could manage a household and help run a small operation. Lily needed a home and a purpose. Nobody was pretending it was anything else. She spent the next 14 days packing what she owned into 2 suitcases, settling a small debt she owed a neighbor, and saying goodbye to a town that barely noticed she was leaving. On the morning of her departure, her sister hugged her at the door and pressed $20 into her hand. In case it goes wrong, she said quietly. Lily took the money. She didn't argue. She had learned a long time ago not to argue with people who might be right. The train ride west took 3 days. Lily sat near the window with her suitcases wedged under her seat and watched the country change around her, from the flat green fields of Ohio to the wide open stretches of Missouri to the dry golden emptiness that seemed to grow bigger the farther west they traveled. She had brought 2 books. She read neither of them. Instead, she watched the landscape and tried to build a picture of the man she was going to marry. The letter from the agency had described him simply. Caleb Anderson, age 34, rancher. Owns a small parcel of land, approximately 400 acres, located 12 miles outside the town of Millridge. Financial situation modest. Seeks a capable woman who is serious about building a life. Modest. That was the word they used. She had read enough of these correspondence letters to understand what modest meant. It meant struggling. It meant barely surviving. It meant a man who needed help more than he needed company. She was fine with that. She had never expected wealth. She had stopped expecting much of anything years ago. What she wanted was simple. A door that was hers. A table where she belonged. A reason to get up in the morning that was more than just obligation. If Caleb Anderson could give her that, she would work beside him until her hands gave out. That was the deal. That was enough. Or so she thought. The train pulled into Millridge just before noon on a Thursday. The platform was nearly empty. Lily stepped off with her 2 suitcases and stood very still while the other passengers moved around her. She looked for a man who matched the description the agency had provided. Tall, dark hair, broad shoulders, usually wearing a brown coat. She spotted him immediately. He was standing at the far end of the platform, apart from everyone else, with his hat pulled low and his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the train. She walked toward him. When she was close enough, she stopped. "Mr. Anderson." He turned slowly, like he had all the time in the world. His eyes were a shade of gray she hadn't expected, not cold exactly, but careful. The kind of eyes that had learned to look before they trusted. Miss Bennet. He didn't extend his hand. He looked at her suitcases instead. That everything? Yes. He picked up both bags without asking and started walking toward the road. Wagons out front. Ride takes about an hour. That was it. No welcome, no pleasantries. Lily fell into step beside him, matching his pace. She noticed his coat was worn at the elbows. His boots were clean but cracked along one side. His hands, when she caught a glimpse of them, were the hands of a man who worked with them constantly, rough, calloused, slightly scarred at the knuckles. Modest, she thought again. Yes, that was the right word. The wagon ride was mostly silent. Caleb drove with the reins held loosely, his posture easy, his attention on the road ahead. He didn't try to fill the silence. After about 20 minutes, Lily decided she would. How long have you had the ranch? 6 years. And before that, a pause. Worked for other people. Where? He glanced at her. Brief. Measured. Different places. She understood that he wasn't going to expand on it. She tried a different direction. The agency said you raise cattle. Mostly, some horses. How many cattle? Another pause. Longer this time. Right now about 60 head. 60 head on 400 acres was lean. She knew enough to understand that. It wasn't a thriving operation, it was a surviving one. Do you have any help? Sometimes, depends on the season. Lily nodded and looked back at the road ahead. She was building her picture piece by piece. A man who didn't talk much, who worked hard and had little to show for it, who had placed an ad in a correspondence agency, not because he wanted romance, but because he needed a partner in the practical sense of the word. She respected that, actually. She respected the honesty of it. What she wasn't prepared for was what she felt when he laughed for the first time. It happened small, almost by accident. The horse stumbled on a loose stone, and Caleb muttered something under his breath, then made a short, dry sound that was almost a laugh. It lasted 1 second, maybe less, but it changed his face completely. For just that moment he looked younger, less guarded, like a man who had a sense of humor that he kept very carefully to himself. Lily looked away before he noticed her watching. She told herself it didn't matter. She was not here to fall in love with a stranger. She was here to build a life. Those were two very different things. The ranch was exactly what she had expected, and somehow still smaller than she had imagined. One main house, wood-framed, weathered to a silver gray by years of Wyoming sun and wind. A barn behind it older than the house. A small chicken coop on the east side. A vegetable patch that had clearly been neglected. A battered fence along the front that someone had repaired so many times it looked like a patchwork quilt. Caleb carried her suitcases inside without ceremony. The front room was clean but bare. A table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace that had seen years of hard winters. A shelf with a handful of books. No curtains on the windows. No rugs on the floors. A house that had been managed by a man alone for a very long time. Lily stood in the middle of the room and took it all in. Caleb set her bags down and watched her without speaking. She turned to face him. Where do I sleep? Room at the end of the hall. I took the room at the front. He paused. I thought you'd want your privacy. I do. She nodded once. Thank you. There's food in the kitchen, enough for tonight. Another pause. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. He left. The door closed quietly behind him, and Lily Bennet stood alone in the bare front room of a stranger's house with 2 suitcases and $20 hidden in her coat pocket. And she did something she hadn't allowed herself to do in a very long time. She put her face in her hands, not from despair, not from regret, from sheer bone-deep exhaustion, because getting here had taken everything she had. And now, the real work was about to begin. She woke the next morning before sunrise to find the house already empty. She could hear him outside, the sound of boots on hard ground, a gate swinging, the low sound of cattle being moved. She dressed quickly, went to the kitchen, and assessed what they had. It wasn't much. Flour, salt, dried beans, a little coffee, some cured bacon wrapped in cloth. But it was enough. She lit the stove with the box of matches left on the shelf and started a proper breakfast. When Caleb came through the door an hour later, he stopped dead at the smell. He looked at the table, 2 plates coffee eggs and sliced bread she had found at the back of the cupboard. He looked at her. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She pulled out her chair and sat down. "Sit down, Mr. Anderson, before it gets cold." He hesitated for just a moment. Then he sat. They ate in silence at first. But it was a different kind of silence than the wagon ride. Less cautious, more comfortable, like 2 people beginning to recognize each other's rhythms. After a few minutes, he said without looking up, "You can cook." "I can do more than that." He glanced at her. "Like what?" "I can keep accounts. I know how to manage supplies and budget what little there is. I can work in a kitchen garden, help with lighter livestock tasks, repair simple things around the house." She met his eyes steadily. "I didn't come out here to be kept, Mr. Anderson. I came here to work." Something shifted in his expression. Subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. "All right," he said. "Just that. All right." And somehow in this bare kitchen at the edge of Wyoming, with 2 strangers sitting across from each other, over plates of eggs and salt bacon, it felt like an agreement more binding than the paper they had both signed. The weeks that followed were hard and honest. Lily threw herself into every task the ranch needed. She reorganized the kitchen from top to bottom, creating a system for what little they had. She repaired the curtain rods using scraps from the barn and hung fabric she found in a trunk at the back of the house. She took over the vegetable patch and began clearing the neglect out of it with a dedication that surprised even herself. She mended Caleb's shirts. She kept the accounts. She made the $20 in her coat pocket stretch further than she had thought possible. And every morning without fail, she woke to hear him already at work before the sun came up. She began to notice things about him that she hadn't expected. He never wasted anything. Not food, not materials, not effort. He was quiet, not from coldness, but from a kind of deep economy. He spoke when it mattered, and was silent when it didn't, and over time she found she trusted his words more because of it. He was also, she discovered, deeply protective. Not possessive, not controlling, but the kind of protective that shows itself in small, consistent ways. Making sure the fire was right before he went to bed, so the house was warm when she woke. Checking the lock on her door every night without being asked. Leaving the last of the bread for her breakfast without comment, eating less himself. She noticed all of it. She said nothing. The first real test came 3 weeks in, when a bank representative arrived at the ranch. Lily was in the kitchen when the wagon came up the road. She watched through the window as a man in a suit climbed down and approached the barn where Caleb was working. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Caleb's posture change. His shoulders dropped, not from defeat, but from something that looked more like resignation, like a man bracing for news he had already prepared himself to receive. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. When the man left, Lily walked to the barn door. Caleb was standing with his back to her, both hands braced on a fence post looking at the ground. What did he want? Caleb didn't turn around. Payment on the loan. They're moving the date up. How much? A long silence. More than we have. Lily absorbed this. She was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully. How much time do we have? 6 weeks, maybe 8 if I push him. Can we sell any cattle? Not at this time of year. Price is wrong. I'd get half of what they're worth. What about the land on the north parcel? Is any of it leasable? He turned then, slowly, looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't seen before. You know about land leasing. My father had a farm. We lost it when I was 15. She held his gaze. I learned to pay attention to how those things work. Another long silence. There might be a way, he said quietly. There's a neighbor, Hartley, who's been asking about grazing rights on the north pasture. I've always said no. Why? Because once you let someone graze your land, it's harder to say no the second time. But if the alternative is losing the loan, his jaw tightened. He looked back at the fence post. I'll talk to Hartley. Good. She turned to go back to the house, then stopped. Mr. Anderson. He looked up. We'll find a way through this. She meant it. Not as comfort, but as a statement of fact. We always do. She went back inside. Behind her she heard the smallest, quietest sound. Not quite a word, not quite a breath. Something that sat exactly in between. She didn't look back, but she felt it. The Hartley arrangement worked. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about their situation was perfect, but it bought them the time they needed, and Lily watched Caleb navigate the negotiation with a precision that surprised her. He knew exactly what he was willing to give, exactly where his lines were. He was polite but immovable, and Hartley, who was clearly accustomed to getting more than he offered, left having given more than he planned. Caleb came back to the house that evening and told her the terms. She looked at the numbers he had negotiated and felt something she hadn't expected. Respect. Pure, uncomplicated respect. That's better than I thought you'd get, she said honestly. He looked at her. Were you expecting me to fail? No. She met his eyes. But I wasn't expecting you to be that good at it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I've had practice. She didn't push it. She just noted it, filed it away with everything else she was slowly learning about this man who claimed to be struggling, and yet handled pressure like someone who had navigated much larger storms. She didn't know yet what to do with that observation. But she kept it. 6 weeks later, the loan was settled. The night Caleb came home and told her they were clear, Lily was sitting at the table with the account books. She looked up. He looked like a man who had put down something very heavy. It's done, he said. I know. She closed the ledger. I saw the balance this morning. He sat down across from her. They were quiet together for a moment, and then he said something she didn't expect. You made a difference. She looked at him. The Hartley arrangement was your doing. The Hartley arrangement was your idea. He held her gaze. You told me to make the call. I wouldn't have made it without you saying it first. She didn't know what to say to that. She had lived so long being useful to people who didn't acknowledge it, that being acknowledged directly, simply without fanfare, it landed somewhere she didn't quite know what to do with. You're welcome, she said finally. He nodded once, and they sat together in the comfortable quiet of a house that felt for the first time since she had arrived like it belonged to both of them. She didn't know it yet, but she was already changing. And so was he. And something much bigger than either of them had planned was about to pull them both apart right at the moment they had finally learned to trust each other. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the first car pulled up to the ranch. Not a wagon, not a horse. A car. Black, expensive. The kind of vehicle that had no business on a dirt road 12 miles outside Millridge, Wyoming. Lily was in the kitchen when she heard the engine. She wiped her hands on a cloth and moved to the window. 2 men stepped out. Both in suits. Both looking like they belonged in a bank in Denver or a boardroom in Cheyenne, not on the front porch of a struggling cattle ranch at the edge of nowhere. She saw Caleb come around from the side of the barn. He stopped when he saw them, completely still. And something about the way he went, still not surprised, not confused, but stiffened, like a man who has seen something he hoped would never arrive, sent a cold thread of unease straight through her chest. She didn't go outside. She watched from the window. One of the men in suits extended his hand and said something. Caleb shook it, but his face had changed completely. The easy, economical calm she had come to know over these months was gone. In its place was something harder, older, something that looked like a man wearing a mask, and the mask had just started to slip. She pressed her hand against the glass. Who are you, she thought. Who are you really? She pressed her hand against the glass, watching Caleb shake that stranger's hand with a face she had never seen before, and in that moment, Lily Bennett understood that she had been living beside a man she did not know at all. The 2 men in suits stayed for 20 minutes. She didn't go outside. She stayed at the window and watched every second of it, tracking the body language the way her father had taught her to read. Whether small signs that told you something big was coming before you could see it clearly. Caleb kept his posture closed. Arms crossed, weight shifted back, chin angled slightly down, every inch of him saying, "I don't want you here," without a single word. The taller of the two men did most of the talking. He kept gesturing toward the north pasture, then toward the barn, then back toward the house. Caleb shook his head 3 times. On the 4th time, the shorter man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document and held it out. Caleb looked at it. He did not take it. The taller man said something else, and whatever it was, it made Caleb's jaw tighten in a way Lily had only seen once before, the day the bank representative came and told him the loan payment had been moved up. But this was different. That day, he had looked like a man receiving bad news. Today, he looked like a man receiving a threat. Finally, Caleb said something short and flat, turned and walked back toward the barn without looking at the house. The two men stood in the yard for a long moment watching him go. Then they looked at each other, folded the document back into the coat, got into the black car, and drove away. Lily stepped back from the window. Her heart was moving faster than she wanted it to. She picked up the cloth from the counter and went back to drying the dishes, because that was what she did when she needed to think. She kept her hands busy and let her mind work quietly underneath. She was still at the sink when she heard the barn door close. She waited. 30 minutes passed. An hour. He didn't come in. She brought him coffee at midday. The barn was warm from the animals, and he was working on a piece of broken harness at the workbench, his back to the door, his hands moving with the mechanical focus of a man who was doing something with his hands so he wouldn't have to do something with his thoughts. She set the coffee on the bench beside him without comment. He glanced at it, then at her. "Thank you." She didn't leave. He kept working on the harness. The silence stretched. Who were they? She kept her voice even, curious, not accusing. His hands slowed, but didn't stop. Business. What kind of business? Land. He kept his eyes on the harness. They want to buy the north parcel. You've had offers before. A few. And you've always said no. I always say no. She studied the side of his face, the set of his jaw, the small tension around his eyes. They didn't look like ordinary buyers. Howe was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down the harness and picked up the coffee. He turned to face her, but he looked past her, not at her. They represent a land consolidation company out of Cheyenne. They've been buying up smaller parcels across the county for the past 2 years. Forcing people out. Buying them out. There's a difference technically. His voice was flat. Doesn't feel much different if you're the one selling. Lily thought about that. And they're pushing hard on the north parcel because it connects their other holdings. Without it, they can't run the full water line they want. So you're the piece they need. I'm the piece they can't finish without. Something moved across his expression, brief and dark. That's why they keep coming back. And that document, an offer. He took a sip of the coffee. A generous one. How generous? He looked at her then, directly for the first time since she had walked in. His gray eyes were careful, measuring. More than this ranch has seen in 6 years. A silence settled between them, heavy with what wasn't being said. Lily held his gaze. But you're not going to take it. It wasn't a question. He looked back at the workbench. No. Why not? A long pause. When he answered, his voice was quieter, almost careful, like a man reaching for a truth he doesn't quite trust himself to say out loud. Because if I sell that parcel, Hartley loses his water access. And if Hartley loses his water access, he loses his herd. He set the coffee down. And Hartley's got 3 kids. Lily stood very still. She had not expected that answer. She had expected something practical. The land value, the grazing impact, the long-term cost to the operation. She had not expected him to name a neighbor's children. You'd hold a loss to protect a neighbor. He picked the harness back up. I wouldn't call it a loss. What would you call it? He didn't answer right away. His hands moved over the leather, testing the repaired joint, flexing it carefully. Then so quietly she almost missed it, doing what's right. She left him there with the harness, and the coffee, and the weight of whatever was sitting on his shoulders that he hadn't yet decided to share with her. She walked back to the house with her jaw set and her thoughts moving fast. Because she was starting to understand something important about Caleb Anderson. He was not the man she had expected, and she still wasn't sure if that was a gift or a problem. October arrived and brought the cold with it. The ranch shifted into its harder season, shorter days, harder ground, longer tasks. Caleb was working from before sunrise to after dark, and Lily matched him hour for hour in her own way, keeping the household running, managing the supplies, salting and preserving what they had stored from the garden. They had developed a rhythm by now, not romantic, not warm in any obvious way, but functional, reliable, and if she was being honest with herself, more comfortable than anything she had known in years. They ate together at 6 in the morning and again at 8 at night. Between those two meals, they moved through the ranch independently and effectively, checking in with each other when something needed to be decided, going quiet when it didn't. She had stopped calling him Mr. Anderson 3 weeks ago without either of them commenting on it. He had stopped knocking before coming into the kitchen 2 weeks after that. Small things. Nothing spoken. Everything understood. Until the night in October when she was reviewing the account books and found something she couldn't explain. She had been tracking their finances with careful precision. Every dollar in, every dollar out. Every cost calculated against what they could realistically expect from the season. She knew the numbers better than she knew anything else about this place, which was why the discrepancy stopped her cold. A payment had been made. A quiet one, just 3 lines in the ledger in Caleb's handwriting recorded at the back of the book, where she wouldn't normally look. The amount wasn't enormous, about $60. But it was made out to a name she recognized, Edna Marsh. She knew that name. Edna Marsh was the widow who lived 4 miles east, the one whose husband had died in February, who was behind on her property tax, who Caleb had mentioned twice in passing, with the kind of brief sideways concern that suggested he thought about her situation more often than he let on. $60. To a widow he barely knew, from a man who had been counting every cent. Lily closed the ledger. She sat for a long time in the quiet of the kitchen, listening to the wind move outside and the fire settle in the grate. And then she did something she hadn't done since she arrived in Wyoming. She felt quietly and without permission. Something pull open inside her chest. Not pity, not admiration. Something closer. Something more complicated. Something that frightened her because she had not come here for it. She closed her eyes, pressed both hands flat on the ledger, and made herself breathe. She was here to build a life, not to fall into one. Those were 2 different things. She had to remember that. She didn't say anything about Edna Marsh's payment, but the next morning at breakfast, she looked across the table at him and said, "I think we should invite Mrs. Marsh for supper one evening." He looked up from his coffee. "Why?" "Because she's alone." She met his eyes. "And it costs us nothing." A pause. He nodded. "All right. Thursday." "Thursday's fine." She turned back to her plate. He was quiet for a moment, then, "How did you know about her situation?" "I pay attention." She kept her voice neutral. "Same as you." He didn't ask anything else, but she felt his eyes on her for a moment longer before he looked away. And she allowed herself, just privately, just for a second, to feel the warmth of being seen. Edna Marsh came on Thursday and stayed 3 hours. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who talked enough for all 3 of them, which suited Lily and Caleb perfectly. She told stories about the county going back 20 years, about people Lily had never met, about the way the land had changed, and the way it hadn't. She also, in the middle of one story, stopped and looked at Caleb with an expression that made Lily's breath catch. "You're nothing like what people say you are," Edna said simply. Caleb's expression went very still. "What do people say?" "Oh, the usual." She waved a hand. "That you're difficult, closed off. That you moved out here to get away from something, and you haven't quite decided whether you're staying." She tilted her head. "But you paid my tax bill, Caleb Anderson, and you didn't tell a single soul, so I'm inclined to trust you over town gossip." The room went absolutely silent. Lily kept her face perfectly still, but her eyes moved to Caleb. He was looking at Ed with an expression she had never seen from him. Something almost raw, almost unguarded, like a man who had been accidentally exposed to light after standing too long in the dark. "That was between us," he said quietly. "And it stays between us." Edna's voice was firm and kind at the same time. "I only said it because your wife deserves to know the kind of man she married." She looked at Lily, held her gaze. "He's a good one, dear, underneath all that quiet." Lily looked at Caleb. He was looking at the table. She didn't know what she felt. There were too many things at once, surprise, confusion, something warm and something frightening in equal measure. She looked back at Edna and managed, "I'm starting to see that." Edna left at 9, and the house settled into its nighttime quiet. Lily washed the dishes. Caleb sat at the table without moving, which was unusual. He was almost always in motion, always finding the next task, the next repair, the next thing that needed doing. Tonight, he was still. She finished the dishes and turned to find him watching her. "You already knew about the payment," he said. It wasn't a question. "I found it in the ledger." She dried her hands. "Weeks ago, and you didn't say anything." "It wasn't my business. You're my wife. A wife isn't a bookkeeper paid to report what she finds." She set the cloth down. "You helped someone who needed it. You didn't do it for credit." She paused. "I respected that enough not to make it a conversation." He looked at her for a long moment. Something was moving in his expression that she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude exactly. Something older, quieter, like a man who was not accustomed to being understood and wasn't entirely sure what to do when he was. "Why did you suggest inviting her then?" "Because she's lonely." She pulled out her chair and sat down across from him. "And because I thought you probably checked on her with money, but maybe not with company." A pause. "I'm not good with company. I've noticed." She allowed the smallest trace of warmth into her voice. She didn't seem to mind. He made that sound again, the one from the wagon ride months ago. That short, almost laugh that changed his face completely. This time it lasted a little longer. And this time she didn't look away. She met his eyes and let herself smile small and real. And the moment that passed between them in that bare kitchen at the edge of Wyoming, not dramatic, not declared, not wrapped in any kind of ceremony, was the closest thing to intimacy she had felt in years. The second large offer came in November. This time the men from Cheyenne didn't come in person. A letter arrived delivered by a courier on horseback, addressed formally to Mr. Caleb Anderson, Hartwell County. Lily was the one who brought in the mail. She set it on the table and went about her business. Caleb read it that evening. He read it twice, then folded it and put it in his coat pocket and didn't say anything about it. Lily waited 2 days. On the third day she said, "Are you going to tell me what was in the letter?" He was putting his coat on to go outside. He paused. "How do you know it was significant?" "Because you've carried it in your pocket for 3 days and you haven't mentioned it." She kept her eyes on the stove she was tending. "That's not how you handle ordinary mail." A pause. He reached into his pocket and put the letter on the table. She picked it up. The offer had doubled. She read the number twice to make sure she was reading it correctly. Then she set the letter down carefully and looked at him. "Caleb, I know. I know what it is. This is enough to clear every debt, rebuild every fence, replace the herd, and have enough left over to—" She stopped. "Why would they offer this much for a single parcel?" He looked at her steadily. "Because the north parcel isn't worth what they're offering for its land value." She frowned. "Then what are they paying for?" A silence. "The water rights," he said. "The north parcel sits on top of the largest underground water source in this section of the county. Whoever controls that parcel controls the water access for 6 surrounding ranches." His voice was very quiet. "If that company owns it, they can charge every small rancher in the area for access to water they've used for 20 years. She stared at him. "6 families," he continued. "Hartley, the Garcias, the Brennans, old Tom Pulley, the Abbott brothers, Mrs. Marsh." He held her gaze. "Every one of them would be at the mercy of a company that doesn't care if they survive or not." Lily felt something cold and certain settle in her chest. She looked at the number on the letter. The enormous life-changing number that could fix every struggling scrape together counted to the penny thing about their current existence. And then she looked back at him. "You're not going to take it." "No. You never were." "No." She exhaled slowly. "So why show me?" He was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked once like he was choosing words carefully. "Because you're my wife." A pause. "And this affects you too. You should know what we're saying no to." Something in that stopped her completely. We. He had said we. Not I. Not my decision. Not I've already decided. We. She picked up the letter, walked to the fireplace and dropped it in. They both watched it burn. Word got out as it always did in small communities. By December, other ranchers in the county knew that the men from Cheyenne had been turned down again by Caleb Anderson, and they knew the reason, or most of it. 3 men came to the ranch separately over the following 2 weeks. Hartley came first, hat in hand, uncomfortable the way proud men always are when they need to say thank you. "I know what you did," he said, standing on the porch. "I know what that offer was worth." Caleb stood in the doorway. "I didn't do anything." "You said no to enough money to change your life." Hartley's voice was rough. "For my family, and the others. I said no because it was right." Caleb met his eyes. "That's all." Hartley nodded. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You need anything, anything at all, you come to me first. You hear me?" "I hear you." Hartley left. Lily was in the kitchen. She had heard all of it through the thin walls of the house. She stood very still at the counter, her hands around a warm cup of coffee, and felt something she had been trying not to feel for months now, pressing hard against the inside of her chest. She was not going to call it love. She was not going to name it at all, because the moment she named it, it became something she could lose, and she had lost enough things in her life to know how badly that hurt. Christmas came without ceremony. They didn't have money for gifts, but Lily had spent 3 weeks quietly working on something, a set of repaired, properly oiled and resharpened tools for the barn cleaned up from the neglected pile she had found in the back corner months ago. She wrapped them in a piece of cloth and left them on the workbench on Christmas morning without a note. She came back from checking the chickens to find a small carved wooden box sitting on the kitchen table. She picked it up. It was simple. Clean lines, smooth surface, the kind of thing made by patient hands over many evenings. The lid fit perfectly. Inside there was a small piece of paper, for keeping what matters. She stood there holding it for a long time. When he came in from outside, she was still standing at the table with the box in her hands. He looked at her, said nothing, hung up his coat. "You made this." It wasn't a question. "Long nights." "It's beautiful." He ducked his head slightly the way he always did when he didn't know what to do with a compliment. "It's just wood." "Caleb." She waited until he looked at her. "It's beautiful." A pause. "Merry Christmas, Lily." Her name. He almost never used her name. "Merry Christmas," she managed, and it was simply genuinely in the way of 2 people who had built something real together and were only beginning to understand what they had. January brought the hardest cold of the season, and with it, the news that shook the entire county. The Garcia Ranch 3 miles south had been sold. Not to the Cheyenne Company, to a different buyer. An intermediary. A name nobody recognized, tied to a company nobody had heard of. But the effect was immediate. The Garcias were gone within 2 weeks, their cattle sold at a loss, their land folded into a larger holding overnight. Their 2 sons had grown up on that land. 3 generations. Gone. Lily heard about it from Edna Marsh, who came by with the news in her eyes before it reached her mouth. Caleb heard about it from Hartley, who rode out in the cold, specifically to tell him. That night, they sat at the table after supper. And Caleb was quiet, in a way she had learned to recognize. Not empty quiet, but the kind full of something being worked out slowly and carefully. "They didn't approach Garcia through the Cheyenne Company," he said finally. "They used a third party so it wouldn't look connected." "Are you certain?" "Hartley knows the buyer's name. I know the name." His voice was flat and controlled. It's a subsidiary. Different letterhead, same money. So they're coming at the county from another angle. They'll do it property by property. He looked at his hands on the table. Slowly enough that nobody connects the pattern until it's too late. Lily was quiet for a moment. Is there anyone in the county who could track it? Someone with legal knowledge. There's a man in Millridge Forrester. He handles property records for the county. He paused. But he won't push on something like this unless there's real proof. Then we get him proof. She met Caleb's eyes. We document every transaction, every subsidiary name, every timeline. She leaned forward. If they're doing this systematically, the pattern is evidence. You just have to make it visible. He stared at her. You'd do that. His voice was careful. You'd put work into fighting a legal battle for other people's land. These are our neighbors. She held his gaze steadily. And if they take the county piece by piece, this ranch is eventually on that list too. A pause. This isn't charity, Caleb. It's survival. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he got up, went to the shelf, came back with a notebook, and sat back down. He opened it to the first page. All right, he said. Let's start. They worked until past midnight. 2 people at a kitchen table in the cold Wyoming winter building. Something that had nothing to do with the land and everything to do with what kind of people they intended to be. And Lily, tracking names and dates by lamplight with Caleb's shoulder close to hers, felt something shift that she could not deny and would not yet say aloud. She was not building a life with a stranger anymore. She was building it with him, specifically, deliberately, with this man who fixed things quietly and protected people loudly and had never once in all these months asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. She had not come here for this. But here it was. And it was the most terrifying thing she had ever felt, because it meant she had something to lose now. Something real. Something that could break her in a way 2 suitcases and a train ticket could never fix. February arrived with a letter that changed everything. Not from the Cheyenne Company. Not from the bank. From a law office in Denver. Addressed to Mr. Caleb James Anderson. Lily received it on a Wednesday morning when Caleb was out on the far pasture. She set it on the table and looked at it. She did not open it. It wasn't hers to open, but something about the return address. Hensley Drake and Croft Attorneys at Law, Denver, Colorado, sat wrong in her mind, the way something sits when it doesn't fit the shape of what you thought you knew. She was still looking at it when Caleb came through the door at midday. He saw it immediately. His entire body changed, shoulders back, jaw tight, face closed in a way she hadn't seen since the day the men from Cheyenne first arrived. He crossed the room, picked up the letter, and stood with it in both hands without opening it. Do you know what it is? She asked quietly. A long silence. Yes, he said. Is it bad? He looked up from the envelope, and his gray eyes, usually so carefully controlled, held something she had never seen in them before. Not fear. Something worse than fear. The look of a man who has been dreading this moment for a very long time and has just run out of road. Caleb. She kept her voice steady. Whatever it is, you can tell me. He looked at her for what felt like a very long time. Then he set the letter down on the table unopened and walked back out the door. She heard his boots on the porch steps. Then silence. She stood in the kitchen with the letter between them and the winter outside and everything they had built in the months between August and February. And she understood with absolute clarity that the thing she had been sensing for weeks, the piece that didn't fit the shadow behind the careful man she had come to know, was finally coming to the surface. She was not ready at all, and the letter sat on the kitchen table like a stone dropped into still water, sending rings outward through everything she thought she had understood about the man she had married. Caleb did not come back inside for 2 hours. Lily did not go after him. She had learned over these months that there were 2 kinds of silence with Caleb Anderson. The first was the comfortable kind, the silence of 2 people who had stopped needing to fill the air between them. The second was the kind he built around himself like a wall when something was pressing on him that he hadn't decided how to carry. This was the second kind. She moved through the kitchen with deliberate, measured calm. She put water on for coffee. She checked the fire. She sat down at the table with the account books and opened them to the current page and stared at the numbers without reading a single one. The letter from Hensley, Drake and Croft sat 2 inches from her left hand. She did not touch it. When the door finally opened and Caleb came back in, his face had gone through something while he was outside. She could see it, the kind of interior negotiation that leaves marks. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the cold or the work. He stood just inside the door for a moment, hat in hand, and looked at her across the room. "Sit down," she said quietly. "Coffee's ready." He came to the table and sat. She poured 2 cups and sat across from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Caleb reached across the table, picked up the letter, and opened it. He read it through twice. His expression did not change. Then he folded it carefully and set it down and looked at the table and said nothing. "Caleb." Her voice was even. "I need you to talk to me." A long pause. He turned the folded letter over in his hands once, twice, like a man counting his heartbeats. "My father died," he said. She waited. 3 weeks ago, in Denver." His jaw was tight. "This is from his attorneys." "I'm sorry." She meant it. "Were you close?" Something crossed his face, brief and complicated and too layered to read in a single pass. "No." "Then why does this letter make you look like that?" He set the letter on the table and turned it to face her. She read it. She read it once, and then she made herself read it again, because the first time she thought she had misread the numbers. She had not. The letter was a formal notification of inheritance from the estate of Mr. William James Anderson, deceased, to his son, Caleb. James Anderson, sole heir. The following holdings were bequeathed: 4 ranch properties across Wyoming and Montana, totaling approximately 68,000 acres, a portfolio of land investments, valued in the document at just under $2 million, mineral rights on 3 separate parcels, and controlling interest in the Anderson Land and Cattle Company, which the letter described as one of the largest private land operations in the Wyoming Territory. Lily set the letter down. She was very still. Outside, the wind moved against the house. The fire settled. She looked at him. He was watching her with the carefully controlled expression of a man waiting for a sentence to be read aloud. $2 million, she said. Not loudly, not with accusation, just the words set down plainly. The land holdings are worth more than that. His voice was flat. That number is the liquid investments alone. She felt something cold and precise move through her chest. 68,000 acres. She looked at the table. And we have been counting pennies. Yes. You let me count pennies. She kept her voice steady, just barely. I counted coins at night, Caleb. I sat at this table and moved numbers around to figure out how to make it to the next month. She looked up. Did you find that amusing? No. His voice was sharp and immediate. Never. Then what was it? Silence. A long, breathing silence that told her the answer was not simple, and that he knew she deserved more than something simple. My father was William Anderson, he said slowly. If you're from the West and you know anything about land, you know that name. She did know it. Vaguely. The Anderson holdings, she had heard the name in county talk and the kinds of conversations that happened between men at the feed store when they thought women weren't listening. A dynasty. Old money. Ruthless in business. I left when I was 22, Caleb continued. I walked away from all of it, his name, his money, his way of doing things. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. He used land the way other men use weapons. He bought people out, forced them off property. Their families had worked for generations, consolidated holdings, until he had more than any one man could justify owning. He looked at her. I watched him do it my entire childhood. I watched what it did to people. And when you left? When I left, I came out here. I bought this parcel with the only money I had that didn't come from him, a small inheritance from my mother's side. 400 acres. His voice quieted. Enough to be something on my own terms. She absorbed this. You hid who you were. I built a different life. That's not the same thing as answering me. He met her eyes. I know. Why the agency? She kept her voice level, but beneath it something was pulling tight. Why a mail-order arrangement? A man with your background? She stopped, rephrased. A man who knew what you came from could have found a wife in any city in the country. Yes. He held her gaze without flinching. A wife who knew the name Anderson, who knew the money, who would have come to Caleb Anderson, the heir, not Caleb Anderson, the rancher. A pause. I wanted to know if someone could see the man before they saw the fortune. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She stood up from the table. She moved to the window and stood with her back to him, and her arms crossed over her chest and pressed her eyes closed for 3 seconds. He did not speak. He waited. When she turned around, her face was composed, but her eyes were not. Do you understand what you're telling me? Yes. You used the agency as a test. Her voice was controlled and precise, and underneath it something was breaking that she would not let him see break. You let me come here. You let me count pennies and mend your shirts and lie awake at night worrying about the loan payment. She paused. Every single day I believed we were building something from nothing, that every choice we made mattered, because we had so little room to make the wrong one. Her voice dropped. Was that real? Or was I an experiment? It was real. He was on his feet now. Every single day of it was real. For you, maybe. She held his gaze. But I didn't know I was being tested, Caleb. I thought I was surviving. His face changed then. Something in it broke through the control briefly, sharply, like light through a crack in stone. I know. That's not an answer. I know. His voice came out rougher than it should have. You're right. You're completely right. I'm not asking you to agree with me. Her voice was shaking now, just slightly, just at the edges. I'm asking you to explain to me how you watched me be afraid of losing this ranch, a ranch that could have been paid off 10 times over with a single call to a Denver attorney, and you said nothing. He took a step toward her. She held her ground. Lily. Don't. The word came out quiet, but final. Don't say my name like that right now. Give me the answer. He stopped. He stood in the middle of the room with 6 feet of space between them and 2 years of his own, carefully constructed reality collapsing around him, and he said the only honest thing left. I was afraid. Of what? Of becoming him. His voice was raw and stripped of all its usual control. My father bought everything land loyalty people. He had a wife who loved his money before she ever looked at his face. He had sons who worked for him because of what they'd inherit, not because they respected who he was. He exhaled hard. I wanted one thing in my life that was real. I wanted one person who would choose me without any of it mattering. She stared at him. The room was absolutely still. And did you find that? Her voice was just above a whisper. Or did you find a woman you kept in the dark so long that she's not sure she knows which part of you to believe anymore? He had no answer for that. Not one that was enough. And they both knew it. She didn't leave the house that night. Where would she have gone in a Wyoming February in the dark? But she went to her room, the room she had kept even as their marriage had softened into something less formal over the months, and she sat on the edge of her bed and she let herself feel the full weight of what had just landed on her. It was enormous, not the money. The money was almost beside the point, which surprised her when she recognized it, because 2 suitcases and $20 from her sister should have made a woman care very much about money. But what moved through her was not greed and not relief. It was grief. She had built something here, something she was proud of. She had come to Wyoming as a transaction, and she had made herself into a partner, a genuine one through actual work and real decisions and genuine care. She had believed down to her bones that every choice mattered because there was no cushion, no fallback, no safety net under them. That belief had made her brave in a way she had never been before. And now she found out the net had been there the whole time. She had been brave for an audience that already knew the trick. That was what broke her. Not the wealth, the performance. She pressed her fists against her knees and breathed, and did not cry, because she had learned very young that tears solved nothing, and she needed her mind clear. She needed to think. In the morning, she was at the stove when he came in. She didn't turn around. He sat at the table. She poured coffee and set it in front of him and sat across the table, and they looked at each other in the early light. "Are you going to leave?" His voice was flat, controlled. But she had learned to hear beneath his control, and what was underneath that question was not flat at all. She looked at him steadily. "I haven't decided." He nodded once. Like a man receiving news he had prepared himself for and still wasn't ready to hear. "I want to understand something," she said. "The men from Cheyenne, the offers on the north parcel, all of that, you turned them down to protect the neighbors." "Yes. Even knowing what it cost us on paper." "Even knowing. But it didn't cost you anything." She kept her voice even. "Not really. A man with $2 million in investments doesn't feel the weight of $60 the same way a struggling rancher does." "That's true." He didn't look away. "But I didn't make those decisions as William Anderson's son. I made them as the man sitting across from you right now." "Are those the same man?" A pause. "I'm trying to figure out if they can be." That answer at least felt honest. She picked up her coffee cup and held it in both hands and looked at the table. "The loan. Was that real?" "Yes." "You actually had a loan on this property?" "I set up the operation exactly as I said, this land bought with my mother's inheritance with a genuine loan from the county bank. Nothing from my father's holdings touched this ranch." He held her gaze. "I wanted it clean." "But you could have solved it at any point." "Yes." "And you let me be afraid." He was quiet. "Caleb." She set down the cup. "I need you to understand something. The money is hard to hear about, but what's harder is this: I was afraid. I was genuinely losing sleep, afraid. And you let me be." Her voice was steady, but her eyes told a different story. "That's not something a man does to a partner. That's something a man does to someone he's still deciding whether to trust." She watched that land on him. She watched him absorb it like a blow he knew he'd earned. "You're right," he said, quietly, completely. "I'm not going to argue with a word of that." "I know you're not." She exhaled slowly. "That's almost harder." Hartley was the first to find out. It happened accidentally, the way most things in small communities do. The Denver attorneys sent a second letter, this one requiring a notarized response, and Caleb had to travel to Millridge to handle it at the county clerk's office. He made the trip on a Tuesday morning and was back by afternoon, and by Wednesday morning, Hartley was at the door. Lily answered it. Hartley's face was a complicated map. He took his hat off when he saw her. "Is he here?" "Barn." Hartley nodded. He started to step off the porch, then stopped and looked at her. "Did you know?" His voice was not unkind, just direct. "No," she said. "I did not know." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded again, put his hat back on, and walked toward the barn. She stood in the doorway and listened to the raised voices that started about 3 minutes later. Hartley's voice carried large outdoor voice, a man used to being heard across distances. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the shape of them. Anger first. Then something more complicated. Silence. Then Caleb's voice lower, steadier for a long time. More silence. Then Hartley came out of the barn, walked past the house without stopping, mounted his horse, and rode off, without looking back. Caleb came out of the barn 5 minutes later. He came to the porch where Lily was still standing. "How much does he know?" she asked. "Enough." He leaned against the post. "The county clerk talks." "What did he say?" Caleb looked at the road where Hartley had ridden. "He said he felt like a fool for thanking a man who didn't need the sacrifice." The words settled between them like something heavy. "Is he right?" Lily asked. "No." Caleb's jaw was tight. "Choosing not to sell has nothing to do with whether I could afford to. The Garcia family had less at stake financially, and they still sold." He met her eyes. "I said no because it was the right thing to do, not because I had nothing to lose." "Hartley doesn't see it that way right now." "I know." He exhaled. "He will, or he won't. Either way, the north parcel stays. She studied him for a long moment. You're not going to chase after him and explain yourself. Explaining myself has never been something I do well. No, she said. It hasn't. He looked at her. She looked back. There was so much in that look, accusation and acknowledgement, and something else underneath it all, that neither of them had the language for yet, or the safety to speak, without it costing more than they could afford to spend. The county found out in layers. First Hartley. Then Edna Marsh, who took it with more grace than most. She appeared at the door the following Thursday, with a jar of preserved peaches, and the expression of a woman who had lived long enough to know that secrets always had reasons, even when the reasons were wrong. He paid my tax bill, she said to Lily, standing on the porch. Rich or poor, he paid it when he didn't have to, and he kept it quiet. I'd say that tells me more about a man than what his father left him. Lily took the peaches. You're more generous than some. I'm old enough to know which battles matter. Edna tilted her head slightly. How are you? Working through it. Good. She reached out and briefly squeezed Lily's hand firm, warm, the kind of touch that carried more information than a conversation. Work is the right thing to do with it. She left. Lily stood in the doorway for a moment with the jar of peaches and thought that Edna Marsh was possibly the wisest person she had met since arriving in Wyoming. By the end of February, the truth had spread far enough that strangers were stopping by the ranch. Not neighbors. Not people with genuine ties. People who had heard Anderson and 2 million and come to look at the situation with the naked interest of people measuring whether something was available to them. A man from the county seat arrived uninvited one afternoon, wanting to discuss Caleb's position on the water rights situation, and by discuss, he clearly meant negotiate, and by negotiate, he clearly meant convince Caleb that his wealth gave him an obligation to manage the situation from the top down, which was another way of saying he wanted Caleb to become the thing his father had been. Caleb closed the door on him before the man finished his third sentence. He didn't slam it, just closed it, firmly. Lily was behind him in the front room. You didn't let him finish. I heard enough. He might have had something worth saying. He came here to tell me that having money means I should use it to run things. Caleb turned to face her. His voice was precise and without heat. That's exactly how my father thought, and it's exactly why I left. She studied him. So what do you do instead? You have $2 million, Caleb. You have 68,000 acres of land. That doesn't just sit quietly. No, he said. It doesn't. Then what? He looked at her for a long moment. I've been thinking about that. He crossed the room and sat down at the table. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a document she had never seen, handwritten, several pages folded along careful creases. He set it on the table in front of her. She picked it up and began to read. It was a plan, a detailed one. He had been working on it for weeks. She could tell the handwriting was dense and precise, the kind that comes from a man thinking hard while his hand moves. It outlined a legal framework for creating a land trust, a structure that would take the most critical water parcels in the county and place them under a protected trust that no single buyer could acquire, overseen by a board of local ranchers. It would use Anderson money to fund the legal costs and the initial land acquisitions. But the land would never belong to Anderson. It would belong to the community. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at him. You wrote to this. She was not asking. I've been working on it for 2 weeks. Since the letter from Denver. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. This is what you want to do with the inheritance. Part of it. He held her gaze. There's enough to set this up and still have money left. The ranch would be properly funded. The neighbors would have legal protection. He paused. It uses what he left me to undo some of what he built. She looked back down at the document. She thought about William Anderson, the man she had never met, who had used land like a weapon and raised a son who walked away from everything he owned to build something smaller and cleaner on his own terms. She thought about Caleb at 22 giving up a fortune to prove something to himself about who he was. She thought about what it cost a person to do that, and she thought about what it cost a person to not understand. It was happening to live beside someone's integrity without knowing its full shape. Caleb. Her voice was quiet. I need to tell you something. He waited. I'm not leaving. She held his gaze steadily. I've thought about it, every angle of it, and I'm not leaving. She paused. But I am angry. I'm genuinely bone-deep angry about the months of not knowing, about being afraid when you had the means to make me safe, about being tested without my knowledge or my consent. I know. Let me finish. Her voice didn't rise. It went quieter. I'm angry about all of that, and I'm going to be angry about it for a while. You don't get to hand me a plan and have that resolve what happened. She pushed the document back towards him across the table. But the plan is good, and the man who wrote it is not his father. She looked at him. Those are both true at the same time. His jaw worked once. Something in his eyes, carefully controlled for months and months, moved. I don't know how to fix it, he said, low and rough and honest. I don't know how to give you back the months of being afraid. You can't. She was steady. You can only go forward from here without secrets. Yes. All of them. She held his gaze. Every account, every holding, every document from Denver. I look at all of it. Yes. And I'm your partner in this, not your wife who is informed after the decisions are made. Yes. He said it without hesitation. Completely. Yes. She nodded once. She picked up the land trust document again and turned to the second page. There are 3 legal issues with this structure, she said. On page 2, the trust governance section, you haven't addressed what happens if the board is deadlocked on a sale vote. She looked up. You need a tiebreaker mechanism, and the water access provisions need to be registered separately from the land deed, or they won't hold if the land changes hands outside the trust. He stared at her. I told you, she said. My father had a farm. We lost it. I paid attention to how those things work. She set the document down. We should get Forrester involved, and a proper land attorney from Cheyenne, not the men from that company, someone independent. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, all right. Tomorrow. We ride into Millridge and we start making calls. Tomorrow, he agreed. She stood up and went to the stove to check the fire. Behind her, she heard the small, quiet sound of him, exhaling the kind of exhale that carries something much larger than air. She did not turn around, but she let herself feel just briefly the shape of where they were, broken and rebuilding at the same time. 2 people who had made real things together, and whose real things were still real, even now, even under all of this, and who were going to have to decide one day at a time if real was enough. She thought it might be. She was not ready to say that yet, but she thought it might be. 3 days later, the men from Cheyenne came back. This time, there were 4 of them. This time, they didn't wait on the road. They came directly to the front porch and knocked. And when Caleb opened the door, the tallest one, a man with a lawyer's careful face and an investor's flat eyes, said simply, Mr. Anderson, we know who you are now. We think it's time to have a different conversation. Caleb looked at all 4 of them. He looked back at the man in front. My answer was no before you knew my name, he said. It's the same answer now. With respect, Mr. Anderson, the situation has changed considerably. The estate holdings in Denver, the Anderson Land and Cattle Company. These are entities with responsibilities. Your father had agreements in place that... My father's agreements died with him. Caleb's voice was perfectly level. I am not my father. You are his heir. I'm the man standing in this doorway. He held the other man's gaze without blinking. And I'm telling you for the last time that the north parcel is not for sale. The water rights are not for sale. And if your company continues to acquire neighboring parcels under subsidiary names to obscure the pattern, I will spend as much of my father's money as it takes making sure that practice is documented and placed in front of every legal body in this territory. A pause. I have the resources to do that now. I think you understand that. The lawyer's face did not change, but his eyes did. Good day, gentlemen. Caleb closed the door. Lily was standing in the front room behind him. She had heard every word. He turned. For a moment they just looked at each other across the quiet of the house. Then she said, "You told them you'd spend the money to fight them." "Yes. Last week you were deciding how to use it." "I decided." He crossed the room, picked up his coat from the hook by the door, and paused with it in his hands. "Turns out there are two things worth spending it on." He looked at her. "Protecting what's right. A beat. And earning back what I broke." She held his gaze. And the thing that was cracked between them, still cracked, still real, still in need of work and time, and more honesty than either of them had practiced, held. Just barely. But it held, and that fragile, hard-won tension between them became the ground they built everything that came next, upon one careful, honest day at a time. The ride into Millridge the following morning was quiet in the old way, not the closed, careful quiet of two strangers measuring each other, but the working quiet of two people thinking through the same problem from different angles. Lily had the land trust document in her coat pocket, with her own notes added in the margins in pencil. Caleb drove the wagon with the reins loose in his hands, the way he always did when his mind was somewhere else. About halfway to town, he spoke without looking at her. "Forrester is going to have questions about the funding source. Let him ask them." She kept her eyes on the road ahead. "The answer is straightforward. The Anderson estate is funding a community land trust. There is nothing to hide in that. People will have opinions about Anderson money being used to do anything in this county. People always have opinions." She turned to look at him. "Do you want to do this or not?" He glanced at her. "Yes." "Then the opinions are something we live with." She looked back at the road. "We've lived with worse." Howe was quiet for a moment. Then so briefly, she almost missed it. The corner of his mouth moved. She let it pass without comment. But she noticed. Gerald Forrester was a compact, careful man in his 50s, who had managed the county property records for 20 years and had developed over those decades the particular talent of a man who has seen everything, the ability to receive information without letting it touch his face. He received the news about Caleb Anderson's inheritance with exactly that skill. He read the land trust proposal with his reading glasses pushed down his nose and his hands flat on his desk, moving through each page methodically. When he finished, he set it down, took off his glasses, and looked at both of them across the desk. "This is going to make enemies," he said. "We're aware." Lily kept her voice level. "The Cheyenne Company has already filed on 2 adjacent parcels. If you establish this trust before they secure the water access they need, they'll challenge it in court. We're counting on that." She leaned forward slightly. "A court challenge creates a public record. A public record documents their acquisition pattern. Their acquisition pattern is the evidence we need to demonstrate intent to monopolize water access." She held his gaze. "We want them to challenge it." Forrester looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. "Where did you find her?" "Agency," Caleb said. Forrester looked back at Lily with an expression that was as close to impressed as, "I'll write you a name." He pulled the piece of paper toward him and began writing. "This is going to take 6 to 8 weeks minimum, possibly longer if they challenge the filing date." "We have time," Lily said. "You also have money now, which helps considerably." He handed the paper across the desk. "The attorney is in Cheyenne, not connected to any of the larger land interests. He's expensive, and he's thorough." Caleb took the paper. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." Forrester picked his glasses back up. "Thank me when it holds up in court." He looked at them both over the rims. "Now get out of my office, so I can start the paperwork." They were back at the wagon before Lily spoke. "He's going to be on our side." "I know." Caleb climbed up to the driver's side. "Forrester has hated the consolidation companies since they bought out the Holbrook parcel 3 years ago. He just needed someone to give him something he could actually do about it." Lily settled beside him. "You knew that before we went in." "I suspected it." She looked at him. "You could have told me. You didn't need me to." He met her eyes briefly before turning the horses. "You handled it better than I would have." She absorbed that. Coming from Caleb Anderson, who trusted actions over words and compliments, not at all, it was the equivalent of a speech. She looked at the road ahead and said nothing, but she let herself feel it. The weeks that followed were the hardest and most clarifying of Lily's life. They worked on the trust documentation. In the evenings after the ranch work was done, spreading papers across the kitchen table by lamplight, cross-referencing property records with the names and filing dates she and Caleb had been tracking since January. They made 2 trips to Cheyenne to meet with the attorney. Forrester had recommended a deliberate, sharp-minded man named Aldous Crane, who asked exactly the right questions and charged exactly as much as Forrester had warned. They paid him without flinching. Lily still felt a complicated jolt every time she saw a number that large move without consequence. The money was real. It was available. Nothing broke when they spent it. After a lifetime of counting every cent, that reality sat strangely in her hands. One evening in the attorney's office, Crane set down his pen and looked at both of them across the desk and said, "I want to be clear about the risk you're taking. If the Cheyenne Company challenges the trust and the court finds a procedural weakness in the filing, they can delay the protection by 2 years. In 2 years, they can acquire every surrounding parcel they need through other means. Then we make sure there are no procedural weaknesses." Lily held his gaze. "I intend to." Crane's voice was dry. "I'm telling you so you understand what we're building, not a wall. A very precise lock. It has to be right the first time." "Then we make it right the first time." She looked at Caleb. "What does he need from us?" Caleb pulled a folder from inside his coat. "Every document the Denver attorneys sent. Every record of the Anderson estate holdings that touches this county." He laid it on the desk. "Including the ones my father used to suppress water access disputes in 1889. He held Crane's gaze steadily. "We're using his records to undo his work." Crane opened the folder. He was quiet for a full minute as he read. Then he looked up. "This is extraordinary. It's what he left behind." Caleb's voice was completely flat. "We're going to do something better with it." The trust filing happened on a Thursday morning in March. Lily was there when Forrester stamped the document and entered it into the public record. She stood in the county clerk's office and watched the stamp come down, and felt something in her chest release a tension she had been carrying since January, since the letter from Denver, since the night Caleb came back inside from the cold and couldn't meet her eyes. Not gone, but lighter. They walked out into the cold March air, and Caleb stopped on the steps and turned to face her. "It's done," he said. "The filing is done." She met his eyes. "The fight isn't." "No." He studied her face. "How are you?" The question caught her off guard, not because it was unusual, but because of how he asked it. Not, "Are you all right?" which was a question that invited a perfunctory answer. "How are you?" Open. Genuine. She thought about it honestly. "Better than I was 2 months ago." She paused. "Not where I want to be yet." He nodded. No pressure, no argument. "What would help?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Time. And you continuing to be exactly what you are right now." "What am I right now?" "Honest," she said simply. "With no reason to be except that it's right." He held her gaze, and then he did something she had not seen him do before. Not in all these months, not through all the hardship and the quiet evenings and the long working nights. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with words attached to it. Just his hand around hers, steady and deliberate. She looked down at their hands. Then she looked back up at him. She didn't pull away. "Come on," she said quietly. "Long ride home." He nodded and released her hand, and they walked to the wagon. But the warmth of it stayed in her palm the entire ride back. The challenge came exactly as Crane had predicted. 3 weeks after the trust filing, a legal notice arrived from the Cheyenne Company's attorneys, a 40-page document challenging the validity of the trust on 7 separate procedural grounds, filed in the territorial court, with a request for an emergency injunction to freeze all trust activities pending review. Caleb brought it to the kitchen table and set it down in front of Lily without comment. She read through it methodically while he waited. When she finished, she looked up. "They've got one legitimate argument. Ground 4, the grantor identification. Crane needs to file a supplemental declaration, clarifying the Anderson estate's authority to fund a trust without probate court sign-off on the full estate accounting. Is that a problem? It's a 3-week fix, not a 3-month one. She set the document down. Telegraph Crane today. He'll know exactly what to do. The injunction request will be denied because it's not supported by the other 6 grounds, and they know that. They're buying time. She stood up and moved to the stove to put water on. Which means they're scared. Caleb was quiet for the moment. You sound certain. A company that's winning doesn't file injunctions. She looked back at him over her shoulder. A company that's losing tries to slow everything down and hope the other side runs out of will. She turned back to the stove. We don't run out of will. That's the answer. He stood at the table for a moment, looking at the document, then at her. Lily. She turned. Thank you. He said it plainly without embellishment. The way he said everything that mattered. She held his gaze. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when Crane files the supplemental and the injunction gets denied. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. All right. She turned back to the stove. Behind her, she heard the sound of him picking up his coat to go to town to send the telegraph. And she let herself feel just for a moment the solid reality of what they had become. Not what she had expected to become. Not what she had come here for. Something harder and realer and more worth having than anything she could have planned. The injunction was denied in April. Crane sent a telegram that said simply, "Injunction denied. Ground 4 resolved. Trust stands. Congratulations." Lily read it at the kitchen table and passed it to Caleb across the breakfast plates. He read it, set it down, and picked up his coffee. That's it. She watched him. What else would there be? She stared at him. Then she laughed, a real one, short and genuine, the kind that surprised even her. He looked at her with that expression she had come to know, the one where he was amused and didn't quite know what to do with it. You just won a legal battle that took 3 months and cost more than this ranch earns in a year, she said, and you're going to sit there and drink your coffee. It's good coffee. A pause. The corner of his mouth curved. You make good coffee. She shook her head. But she was still smiling when she picked up her own cup. Hartley came back in May. He rode up the road on a Tuesday afternoon, and Lily saw him from the window and went to the door before he reached the porch. He stopped when she opened it. Is he here? Same question as before, different tone. The anger was gone. Barn. Same answer. He nodded, started to go, then stopped. He looked at her. I owe you an apology, he said. She waited. When I found out about the money, I was angry at him, but I took it out by avoiding you. He turned his hat over in his hands. That wasn't right. You didn't know. No, she said. I didn't. Are you? He paused, measuring his words carefully the way men did when they were not practiced at this kind of conversation. Are you all right, the two of you? She considered that honestly. We're working at it. That's more than most people do. He looked down at his hat. The trust, what he did with that money, I've had time to think on it. He looked back up. It's not nothing. What he turned down and what he did instead. No, she agreed. It's not nothing. He was quiet for a moment. I said some hard things to him in that barn. He can take hard things. I know. Hartley exhaled. That's why I said them. He put his hat back on. I'll go find him. She stood in the doorway and watched him walk toward the barn, and heard about 5 minutes later the low sound of voices, measured this time, not raised. The sound of 2 men working something out. When Hartley left an hour later, he stopped at the porch again briefly. Good woman, he said simply. Not to her specifically, almost to himself. Then he tipped his hat and rode off. She went back inside and found Caleb standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed and his expression looser than it had been in months. Better, she asked. Some things needed to be said. He uncrossed his arms. On both sides. I know. She turned back to the pot she was tending. He called me a good woman on his way out. He's right. She kept stirring. Don't push it. The almost laugh. Quiet, genuine brief. She smiled at the wall, where he couldn't see it. June brought the first real test of the trust. A smaller parcel on the county's eastern edge owned by a man named Pulley. Old Tom Pulley, who ran sheep and had been on that land for 30 years, was targeted by the Cheyenne Company through yet another subsidiary. The offer came in low and pressured. Pulley was 71, his wife had been ill all winter, and the offer was framed not as an opportunity, but as a warning. Take this now before circumstances make the decision for you. Pulley brought the letter to Caleb on a Saturday morning, holding it in both hands like something that had burned him. I don't want to sell, he said. He was a small, weathered man who held himself very straight. But I don't know that I have a choice. Caleb took the letter, read it, handed it to Lily. She read it through, tracking the language carefully, the veiled implications, the deadline, the name of the subsidiary at the bottom that matched 3 other names in their documentation file. You have a choice, she said to Pulley, and you have backup. She looked at Caleb. He nodded. The trust covers water access on your eastern boundary, Caleb said to Pulley, which means if you refuse this offer, they can't use water pressure to force you out. He held the old man's gaze. You refuse. If they push harder, you bring the letter to Crane in Cheyenne, and we file it as evidence of coercive acquisition practice. We've been building that file since January. Pulley was quiet for a moment. He looked at the letter in Lily's hand, and they'll come back with a harder offer. Possibly. Lily handed the letter back to him. But every time they come back, they create another document, and every document goes into the file. She met his eyes steadily. They're not trying to buy your land anymore, Mr. Pulley. They're trying to make you tired enough to stop fighting. She paused. Are you tired? The old man straightened further. Something came into his eyes, sharp, decided 71 years of Wyoming stubbornness. No, he said. I am not. Good. She sat back. Then neither are we. He left with the letter and a written summary of his legal protections under the trust which Lily had prepared in advance because she had been expecting exactly this kind of approach since March. After the door closed, Caleb looked at her. You prepared that document before he came. I prepared it 2 weeks ago. She started stacking the papers on the table. I knew they'd go after Pulley next. He's the most isolated holding on the eastern edge, and his wife's illness was public knowledge by April. She glanced up. They look for weakness. We have to look for it first. He was still looking at her with that expression she had stopped trying to name and started simply accepting the expression of a man who was seeing someone clearly and finding the view remarkable. What? She asked. Nothing. He moved to help her stack the papers. Just thinking. About what? A pause. That I understand something now that I didn't before. She waited. I told myself I was looking for someone who could love the man behind the money. He aligned a stack of papers without looking at her. But I wasn't looking for someone to be quiet beside me. I was looking for someone to stand beside me. He set the papers down and looked at her. Those are different things. The room was very still. Lily held his gaze. She could feel the weight of everything between them, the months of hardship, the deception, the broken trust, the slow, careful rebuilding. She could feel all of it at once. Yes, she said. They are different. I know that now. She looked at him for a long moment. Caleb, I need you to understand something about me. He waited, completely still, completely present. I didn't come here to be half of something, she said. I came here because I had nothing and I needed a start. She kept her voice even and clear. What I built here, what we built, is mine as much as it's yours. Not because your name is on the deed and you've handed me access to it. Because I worked for it. Because I bled for it. Her voice didn't waver. The woman who reorganized this kitchen and fixed the account books and told Hartley to call the Cheyenne Company, that woman earned her place here. She did. His voice was completely certain. Then don't thank me for doing what I was already going to do anyway. She held his eyes. Be my equal. That's all I've ever wanted." A long silence. He crossed the room in 4 steps, and he took her face in both hands. Rough, calloused hands, the hands of a man who had worked them honest for 6 years, and he looked at her with his gray eyes wide open. For the first time, no guard, no calculation, nothing held back. "You are the best thing that ever came to this ranch," he said, low and absolute, "and I am sorry for all of it." She reached up and covered one of his hands with hers. "I know," she said. "That's not enough." "No." She held his gaze. "But it's where we start." What happened next in the county did not happen quickly. Real change never does. But it happened piece by piece in the way of things built by people who don't quit. The Cheyenne Company filed 2 more legal challenges over the summer. Crane answered both. The trust held. Word spread to neighboring counties that Hartwell had established a model that worked a community structure backed by enough legal and financial weight that it couldn't be simply purchased away. Letters came in from ranchers in 3 other counties asking for details. Lily wrote back to everyone. She did it at the kitchen table in the evenings carefully and specifically because she understood that the details mattered, that a vague promise of protection was worthless, and that what people needed was the precise practical language of how the thing actually worked. Caleb proofread every letter. He corrected her legal terminology twice, and she corrected his grammar 3 times, and neither of them commented on the arrangement because it had simply become what they did. One evening in July, he set down a letter he was reviewing and said without preamble, "I want to show you the Denver accounts." She looked up. "All of them," he said. "Not a summary. The actual documents." "You've shown me the estate accounting. The estate accounting is what the attorneys prepared." He held her gaze. "I'm talking about the personal accounts, the ones I kept private even after the Denver letter." He paused. "I told you no more secrets. I'm holding one, and I don't want to hold it." The room was very still. "How large is it?" she asked carefully. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. "That's nearly double what the estate letter listed," she said. "Yes." "How?" "Investments I made on my own separate from my father's holdings. Started at 22 when I left." He held her gaze steadily. "I told you I wanted to build something on my own terms. I was building 2 things simultaneously. The ranch here with my mother's money, and a separate financial position with my own work that had nothing to do with him." She stared at him. "You built that independently?" "Over 12 years, yes." "While living like you had nothing. While living the way I chose to live." His voice was firm, but not defensive. "The money was never the point. The life was the point." She stood up from the table, walked to the window, stood with her back to him. He waited. She turned around. "Why didn't you tell me when you told me the rest?" "Because I wasn't sure how you'd take it." His voice was honest and quiet. "Another hidden account on top of everything else. I thought it would break the last thing that was still holding. So you waited." "I waited until I was certain we were past the breaking point." He held her gaze. "Are we past it?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Show me the documents," she said. He went to the shelf where he kept the locked box. She had noticed the box before, but never asked, and brought it to the table and opened it. There were 12 years of carefully kept records inside. She sat back down and began to read. He sat across from her and said nothing. She read for an hour. When she finished, she closed the last folder and set it on top of the others and sat quietly for a moment. "You're very good at this," she said finally. "At what? Building things." She looked at the folders. "You built this ranch. You built this financial position. You built the trust. You built—" She stopped, looked at him. "You've been building things your whole life, Caleb, and telling yourself you were just surviving." Something moved in his face, brief and deep. "Someone told me recently that I didn't understand the difference between surviving and building," he said, quietly, carefully. She recognized her own words coming back to her in a different shape. "She was right," he said. "I didn't. I thought if I kept things small enough, honest enough, they couldn't be taken away." His voice dropped slightly. What I didn't account for was that small and honest doesn't protect you from losing things. It just means what you lose was real. She held his gaze. And the thing she had been refusing to name through all these months, since the Christmas morning, with the wooden box, and the winter nights over the account books, and his hand around hers, on the steps of the county clerk's office. The thing she had kept carefully unnamed, because naming it meant it could break her. She let herself name it, quietly, privately, without ceremony. She loved him. She loved the difficult, closed, deeply principled, occasionally infuriating man sitting across from her with 12 years of secret, careful work laid out between them. She loved him. She was not going to say it tonight. Tonight was for the documents and the truth of the accounts, and the next careful step in the long work of trust being rebuilt. But she knew it. And knowing it changed the shape of the room. August came with heat and long days, and a rhythm on the ranch that had nothing modest about it anymore, and yet somehow remained in every way that mattered the life they had built together. They hired 2 ranch hands properly now with proper wages. They rebuilt the fence line on the east boundary. They replaced the barn roof and repaired the chicken coop and planted the kitchen garden 3 times larger than last year. And every evening when the work was done, they sat at the kitchen table and they worked on whatever needed working. The trust correspondence, the county letters, the legal documents from Crane. One evening in late August, Crane himself made the drive out from Cheyenne. He arrived unannounced, which was his way, and Lily put coffee on while Caleb and Crane sat in the front room. She listened from the kitchen. "The second challenge has been dismissed," Crane said. "Permanently. They've run out of procedural grounds." A pause. "I'll be direct with you, Anderson. The company is pulling back. They're shifting their acquisition strategy to a different county." Another pause. "You won." Lily stood at the stove with her hand around the coffee pot. From the front room she heard Caleb say, "We won. You, your wife, and a considerable amount of Anderson money." Crane's voice was dry. "And 12 months of extremely careful legal work." "The trust will hold without us pushing?" Caleb asked. "The trust will hold. The board is established. The protections are registered. 6 ranching families in this county will never need to negotiate water access with a private company." A pause. "Your father spent 40 years acquiring influence over this territory. You dismantled the mechanism and won." The room was very quiet. Lily carried the coffee through. She set a cup in front of each of them and sat in the chair beside Caleb and looked at Crane. "What's next?" she asked. Crane raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon. The neighboring counties that wrote to us. 3 of them are in the same situation Hartwell was in 6 months ago." She held his gaze. "The trust model works. Can it be replicated without starting from scratch each time?" Crane looked at her, then at Caleb, then back at her. "With the right documentation and a template instrument, yes." He picked up his coffee. "It would require someone who understood both the legal structure and the practical circumstances of each county." "We can do the practical side," she said. "We know these communities. It would take significant time. We have time." Crane looked at Caleb. "Is she always like this?" "Yes," Caleb said, immediately. Crane took a slow sip of his coffee and looked back at Lily with an expression she recognized from Forrester's office, the particular look of a careful man encountering something he hadn't expected. "All right," he said. "Let's talk about a template." Crane left at nightfall. The house settled into its familiar quiet. Lily cleared the coffee cups, and Caleb banked the fire, and they moved around each other in the comfortable choreography of 2 people who knew each other's patterns by heart. He was putting on his coat to check the barn when she said without planning to, "Caleb." He turned. She looked at him across the front room. This man who had fixed fences before sunrise every day of a Wyoming winter, who had paid a widow's tax bill and never told a soul who had walked away from a fortune to prove something true to himself, and in doing so had been lonely for 12 years, until she arrived with 2 suitcases and a plan and no idea what she was walking into. She looked at him, and she let him see her face without the careful composure she usually kept between them. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited, still, completely present in the way that was entirely his own. "I am still angry." Her voice was steady. "About the months of not knowing. About being afraid when I didn't need to be. That's real, and it doesn't go away because we won a legal case, or built a trust, or because things are better now." He nodded. "I know, and I want you to know it's not going away quickly." She held his gaze. "It's going to sit beside everything else we are for a long time. I need you to understand that." "I do." His voice was very quiet. "I'll take it. I know you will." She exhaled slowly. "And I also need you to know—" She stopped, took one more breath. "I also need you to know that I am still here." She looked at him directly. "Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because of the money or the trust or any of it." Her voice was low and absolutely clear. "I am here because I choose to be. Because you are underneath all the secrets and the stubbornness and the 12 years of hiding behind a borrowed poverty. You are exactly what I would have chosen if I had known to look for it." The room was completely still. Caleb looked at her with those open gray eyes that had taken her months to learn to read. He crossed the room. He didn't reach for her this time. He stopped one step away and looked at her face like he was committing it to memory, like a man who has been given something he doesn't trust himself to hold tightly enough. "Lily." His voice was rough. "I want to earn that. You already are." She reached out and put her hand flat against his chest over his heart, through the worn fabric of his coat. "Keep going." He covered her hand with his. And they stood there in the quiet house in the life they had built from scratch, and from secrets, and from anger, and from honesty, and from the hard, specific daily work of choosing each other, and it was not perfect, and it was not finished, and there was still a long way to go. But it was real. Every single inch of it was real. And in a world that had offered Lily Bennett very little that was real, that meant more than she had any words for, and so she stopped looking for words, and simply held on one hand over his heart, letting the truth of where they had arrived speak for itself in the silence between two people who had finally stopped hiding from each other. September came in hard and gold. The ranch had transformed in ways that were visible and in ways that were not. The visible ones were easy to see. The repaired fence line running clean along the east boundary, the new barn roof, the kitchen garden, still producing long past. What Lily had hoped for the two ranch hands who showed up every morning with the reliability of men who were paid fairly and treated well. The invisible transformation was harder to point to, but more significant by far. It lived in the way Caleb moved through the ranch without the coiled, watchful tension she had noticed from the very first day. It lived in the way Lily sat at the kitchen table without counting before she spent. It lived in the way they looked at each other across a room, not with the careful measuring distance of two people establishing boundaries, but with the direct, unhurried recognition of two people who had stopped needing to protect themselves from each other. They were not fully healed. She had told him clearly that they wouldn't be not quickly, and she had meant it. But they were building. Every day, deliberately and without pretense, they were building. And then the letter arrived from her sister. It came on a Tuesday, the same day of the week that the original agency letter had arrived at her sister's house in Ohio 14 months ago. Lily noticed this when she looked at the calendar later. She didn't know what to make of it. Maybe nothing. Maybe just the way things circle back. Her sister's name was Clara. They had not corresponded much since Lily left a brief letter in October, another around Christmas. The kind of letters that reported facts without revealing anything true about the state of either person's inner life. Lily had kept her own letters that way deliberately. She hadn't known how to explain what her life here actually was. She read Clara's letter at the kitchen table while Caleb was out on the far pasture. Clara had heard about the Anderson inheritance from a cousin who had seen something in a Denver newspaper. The cousin had written to Clara immediately, and Clara, being Clara, had written to Lily with the kind of rapid, voluminous concern that expressed itself through multiple underlined phrases and at least one exclamation point per paragraph. "Lily, I read it, and I thought I had the wrong name. Anderson. The Anderson family. The land people. Is that who you married? Are you all right? Do you need anything? What is happening out there? The letter went on for 3 pages. Lily read all of it. Then she sat quietly for a long time with her hands around a cold cup of coffee. She thought about the woman who had left Ohio with 2 suitcases and $20 pressed into her palm. She thought about the fear she had carried on the train, the very real, very practical fear of a woman going somewhere unknown to marry a stranger she had never met, with no guarantee that any of it would be what she needed it to be. She thought about everything that had happened since. Then she picked up a pen and began to write. She wrote for an hour, the longest letter she had written in years. She told Clara everything, not the financial details, not the legal battles, but the real things. The first morning she made breakfast, and Caleb sat down without being asked. The day the bank representative came, and they faced it together. Edna Marsh and the jar of preserved peaches. The Christmas wooden box with the piece of paper inside. The night the truth came out, and she stood at the window feeling something crack open in her chest that she didn't know how to name. She told Clara that she had been angry, genuinely bone-deep angry. She told Clara that she was still working through parts of it. And she told Clara what she had not yet told another living person outside of the walls of this house, that she loved him. That she had chosen him specifically, deliberately, with full knowledge of every difficult thing about who he was. That she would make that choice again. She sealed the letter and set it on the table to go out with the morning mail. When Caleb came in at dusk, he saw the letter and glanced at it. "Your sister?" "Yes." He sat down and poured his own coffee from the pot on the stove. "Everything all right?" She saw something about the inheritance in a Denver paper. Lily set the pen down. She wanted to know if I was all right. "Are you?" She looked at him across the table. I told her yes. He held her gaze. "Was it true?" "More than it's ever been." She picked up the letter. "I told her about you." A pause. "What did you say?" She let the smallest smile come through. "That you're difficult and stubborn, and that I'd do it all again." She stood and moved to set the letter by the door for morning. She'll probably write back in 2 weeks with 17 more questions. "You could write to her more often." He set down his cup. "She's your family." She turned to look at him. I was looking at this table, not at her, the way he usually delivered something that mattered sideways, like he wasn't sure how it would land. "She could visit," he said. "If she wanted, there's room now." Lily stood very still for a moment. She hadn't thought about that. Hadn't let herself think about it, about the possibility of having people she loved share the space she had built, because for so long, the space had been barely enough for 2 people and a hope. "She'd drive you absolutely insane," she said finally. "Probably." He looked up. "Invite her anyway." She laughed, a full one, genuine, the kind that came all the way up from somewhere warm. He watched her with those open gray eyes and let the sound of it fill the room without trying to do anything with it. She wrote a second letter to Clara that evening. 1 line. "Come in the spring. Bring nothing but yourself." The letter from the neighboring county arrived 2 weeks later. Not from a stranger this time. From a man named Ellis, a county commissioner from Garfield County, 2 territories east, who had heard about the Hartwell Trust through 3 separate conversations at 3 separate feed stores, and had finally tracked down a direct address. His letter was direct and plain-spoken. His county was facing the same pattern, a slow, systematic acquisition of small parcels through subsidiary companies. The same water access pressure. The same families who had been on their land for 30 years, suddenly receiving offers framed more like warnings. He had read Crane's summary of the Hartwell Trust structure. He wanted to know if it could be replicated. He was willing to travel to Hartwell to discuss it. Lily brought the letter to Caleb that evening. He read it through, then handed it back. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think we say yes." She set the letter on the table. "We've built the template. Crane has the legal framework ready. What Ellis needs isn't money. His county has ranchers with resources if they pool them." She looked at Caleb. "What he needs is the map. Someone to show him that it can be done. It'll mean time away from the ranch. The ranch can survive a few days with Hanson and the boys running it." She held his gaze. This is what we said we wanted to do with it. He looked at the letter again. Write back to him, he said. Tell him to come. She was already reaching for the pen. Ellis arrived on a Thursday in late October. A tall, rangy man in his 40s with a weathered face and the careful, watchful manner of someone accustomed to being underestimated in formal settings. He came alone, which Lily noted, and respected a man who didn't need backup for a conversation. He sat at the kitchen table with Caleb and Lily, and a pot of coffee, and the full documentation file, and they worked through it for 6 hours straight. Ellis asked good questions. Sharp ones. He understood immediately what the trust protected and where its limits were, and he pushed on both with the precision of a man who had thought about his county's specific situation deeply. Twice he looked at Lily, mid-explanation, and said simply, "That's exactly the problem we're facing," with the tone of a man finding words for something he'd been trying to articulate for months. By the evening, they had a framework adapted to Garfield County's specific legal situation. Crane's template as the foundation, but adjusted for the different property structure, the different water sources, the different pattern of the acquisition company that was moving through his county. When Ellis stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I want to ask you something," he said, looking at both of them. "And I want a straight answer." Caleb nodded once. "The Anderson money behind this trust, people are going to ask about it in my county. Some of them are going to be wary. Big money helping small ranchers sounds like a different kind of control to people who've been hurt before." His eyes were direct. "What do I tell them?" Lily answered before Caleb could. "Tell them the trust doesn't belong to Anderson," she said clearly. "The money funded the legal structure. The land and the water rights belong to a board of local ranchers who govern it themselves. Anderson can't vote on trust decisions, can't override the board, can't reclaim the parcels." She held Ellis's gaze. "The money built the fence. It doesn't control what grows inside it." Ellis looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. "She always answer for you. When she's faster and more accurate than I am." Caleb said yes. Ellis nodded slowly. He picked up his hat. "I'll be in touch with Crane." He looked at Lily one more time. "That was a good answer, Mrs. Anderson." She walked him to the door. When she came back to the kitchen, Caleb was still at the table with his hands around his coffee cup. "2 counties," he said. 3 by spring if Crane's prediction holds." She sat back down. He said Fremont County is watching Hartwell closely. Caleb was quiet for the moment. "This is going to become something larger than the 2 of us." "It already is." She met his eyes. "Is that all right?" He looked at the papers spread across the table, the trust documents, Ellis's county map, the correspondence file, the ongoing records she had organized into something a lawyer could use and a rancher could understand. He looked at all of it, and then he looked at her. "It's more than all right," he said. The twist came from a direction neither of them had expected. In November, a letter arrived from the Denver attorneys, not about the estate, which had been settled and transferred. This letter was about something else entirely. Something Lily had not known existed. There was a second will, not William Anderson's will. A private document separate from the estate filing that had been discovered during the final review of the Denver office records. It was dated 7 years earlier, written in William Anderson's hand, and it was addressed not to his attorneys or his bank or any of his business interests. It was addressed to Caleb. The attorneys had debated for 2 months whether to send it. In the end, they concluded they had a legal obligation to forward it as personal correspondence, regardless of its content. Caleb read it alone. Lily knew he was reading it because he went to the front room and sat in the chair by the window. The chair he never sat in, and he was there for a very long time. She did not intrude. She went out to the kitchen garden and checked the last of the fall vegetables and let him have the time he needed. When she came back in, he was still in the chair, but the letter was folded on his knee. She sat in the opposite chair and waited. He looked at the letter, then at her. "He knew," Caleb said quietly. She waited. "He knew I had left because of how he operated. He knew I had bought this ranch with my mother's inheritance and set up an independent position." His voice was carefully controlled. He had known for years. He had people watching not to interfere, just to know. Did that bother you? It should. He paused. It doesn't entirely. He looked at the letter. He writes that he saw what I was building here. The small operation, the honest way of running it, the refusal of his money. His jaw tightened for just a moment. He writes that it made him understand something about what he had done wrong. The room was very still. Not an apology, Caleb continued. Not quite. He wasn't built for apologies. His voice had a tone in it she hadn't heard before, not grief exactly, not forgiveness. Something more complicated than either. The sound of a man finding words for a feeling that doesn't have a clean name. But he writes that he had watched me choose differently than he had, and that he had wanted me to have the estate because he believed I would use it to correct what he had built. Lily absorbed this slowly. He knew, she said. He knew. He left you everything expecting you to dismantle it. Not dismantle, Caleb's voice was quiet. Transform. He looked at her. He used that word, transform. She thought about William Anderson, the man who had used land like a weapon, who had built an empire by forcing families off the ground they had worked for generations. She thought about what it would take for a man like that in the last years of his life to look at the son who had walked away from him and feel something other than contempt for the rejection. She thought about what it cost him to write that letter. "Are you all right?" she asked. Caleb was quiet for the long moment. "I'm not sure." He looked at his hands. He was not a good man. Nothing in this letter changes what he did to people. His voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath it. But he was watching. For years he was watching, and he stopped. He wrote at the end that he was proud of me. Silence. 3 words at the end of a letter from a man I hadn't spoken to in 12 years. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know what to do with that." Lily got up from her chair. She crossed the room and sat on the arm of his chair and put her hand on his shoulder. He leaned into it just slightly, just enough. "You don't have to do anything with it tonight," she said. "No. Or ever if you decide not to." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "He never met you." "No. I think he would have—" He stopped. She waited. "I think he would have understood why." His voice was very quiet. "Why I used the agency. Why I needed to know if someone could see the man before the name." A pause. "I think he spent his whole life not knowing if the people around him were there for the man or the money, and he made his choices accordingly." He looked at the letter in his hands. "I made different choices. Worse ones in some ways, better in others. But I think he understood why." Lily looked at the side of his face. This man she had married for survival and stayed for love. This man who carried more than he showed and meant more than he said. "Caleb." She kept her voice gentle. "You are nothing like him." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm trying not to be." "You don't have to try," she said. "You just are." He looked up at her. She held his gaze without flinching. "You paid a widow's tax bill and never told a soul," she said. "You turned down $2 million to protect a neighbor's water access. You built a legal trust for 6 families who had no reason to trust the Anderson name." She paused. "The man in that letter spent his life taking land. You've spent the last year giving people the ground to stand on." Her voice was steady and clear. "You are not him." He reached up and covered her hand on his shoulder with his own. They sat together in the quiet of the front room, with the November wind outside, and the fire settling in the grate, and the letter from a dead man on his knee. After a long while, he folded the letter carefully and put it in his coat pocket. "I'll keep it," he said. Not with warmth, not with grief, just with the quiet decision of a man who has found a place for something complicated. Not because it changes anything, because it's true. She nodded. He stood up, put his coat on the rest of the way, and looked at her with his open gray eyes. "Come outside with me," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "It's cold." "I know." He held out his hand. "Come anyway." She came anyway. They stood together outside the front of the ranch that had been a worn, weathered, silent place when she first arrived, and was now in the particular way of things that have been cared for, simply alive. She stood beside him and looked at the same sky he was looking at, and she understood in the way you understand things that don't arrive in words that this was what he needed. Not conversation, not comfort. Just this another person standing beside him in the cold and looking at the same thing and being there. She was good at this now. She had learned it from him, actually. That sometimes presence was the whole answer. After a while he said, "Clara is coming in March." "She is." Lily smiled. "Prepare yourself." "How bad?" "She will reorganize the kitchen and have an opinion about everything, and talk more in one day than you've talked in 6 months. She glanced at him. "You'll survive." The almost laugh. "I'll survive." She looked back at the sky. "Caleb?" "I'm glad I came here." He was quiet, then simply, "So am I." Not because of how it turned out. She meant it specifically. Not because of the money or the trust or any of it. She looked at him. "I'm glad because of who you are. The man who was here before any of that mattered." He held her gaze. "The man who fixed fences before sunrise," she continued. "Who left bread for my breakfast and said nothing about it. Who paid a widow's tax bill and kept it secret." She paused. "That man." She held his gaze. "I would have chosen that man in a bare kitchen with 60 head of cattle and a bank loan and no fortune anywhere in sight." His jaw moved slightly. His eyes were very steady. "I know," he said. "I need you to know it." She held his gaze without letting go. "Not because you doubt it. Because it's true, and true things deserve to be said out loud." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture of a man who is comfortable enough with someone that small tenderness has stopped requiring permission. "I know," he said again, softer. She turned back to the sky. They stood together in the cold for another few minutes. Then she said, "Come inside. I'll make supper. I'll finish the check on the east fence. You checked it this morning. I'll check it again." She shook her head. "You will find something to do with your hands every time you don't know what to do with your feelings." He said nothing. She glanced at him. He was looking at the fence line. "That was accurate," she said. "Yes," he admitted. "Come inside, Caleb." She said it with warmth and no impatience at all. "The fence is fine. Eat supper with me." He came inside. Spring arrived with Clara. Clara Bennett arrived on a Tuesday, same day of the week as everything that had ever mattered in Lily's life. She was beginning to think with one trunk a hat box, and the expression of a woman who had spent 2 months preparing what she intended to say, and was now revising it rapidly in the face of reality. She stood in the front room of the ranch house, and turned slowly around. Taking in the curtains, Lily had hung the rugs she had found, and laid the bookshelves that had been reorganized, and added to the warmth, in a house that had apparently been cold and bare when Lily arrived. She turned back to her sister. "This is—" She stopped. "What?" Lily kept her expression neutral. "This is home." Clara's voice was slightly unsteady. "You built a home." "Yes." Lily took her coat. "Come and meet my husband." Caleb was in the kitchen. He stood when Clara came in, the way he had always stood when someone entered a room out of habit and respect, not performance. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She was not subtle about her appraisal. He stood through it with the particular patience of a man accustomed to being evaluated and unconcerned by it. "You're taller than I imagined," Clara said finally. "And quieter than you expected, probably," Caleb replied. Clara blinked. Then she laughed a laugh that sounded so much like Lily's that he glanced at Lily with a surprised half-expression that Clara caught immediately. "He's funny," Clara said to Lily. "You didn't say he was funny." "He's not funny," Lily said. "He's dry. There's a difference. I'll take it." Clara sat down at the table without waiting to be invited. "Put the coffee on, somebody. I've been on a train for 3 days, and I need to tell you everything that's happened in Ohio." Caleb looked at Lily. Lily looked back at him with an expression that said, "I told you." He went and put the coffee on. Clara stayed 3 weeks. She did as predicted, reorganize the kitchen on day 2. She had opinions about everything from the placement of the vegetable rows to the color of the curtains in the spare room. She talked more in a single afternoon than Caleb normally managed in a fortnight. And she watched. Clara was a watcher, underneath all the talking, sharp-eyed, perceptive. The kind of observer who cataloged everything and commented on nothing until she had decided what she thought. Lily had grown up knowing her sisters watching and was not surprised by it. What surprised her was what Clara said on the last night of her visit. They were sitting at the kitchen table after supper, just the two of them, with Caleb outside doing his evening check of the animals. The lamplight was warm and the house was quiet, except for the particular alive quiet of a home that is genuinely inhabited. Clara was looking at her hands around her coffee cup. "When you wrote that you'd do it all again," she said without preamble, "I thought you were being brave." She looked up. "You weren't being brave. You were being accurate." Lily held her gaze. "Yes." "He watches you," Clara said. "Not the way men watch women when they're proud of them or when they're assessing them." She paused. "He watches you the way a man watches someone he can't quite believe he has and is determined not to take for granted." Her voice was quiet and certain. "I've been married 12 years, Lily. I know what that looks like." Lily looked at the table. "Don't be modest about it," Clara said firmly. "You built this, you and him together, but you put the first stone down every single time." She leaned forward slightly. "You came here with nothing, and you made something real." Lily was quiet for a moment. "I had help. You had a man who needed you to help him see who he could be." Clara's voice was warm and direct. "That's not the same as having support. That's choosing someone and working for it every day." She sat back. "I'm proud of you." The words landed in a way Lily hadn't expected, not as sentiment, but as recognition. As one person seeing another person's work clearly and calling it what it was. She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for coming." Clara reached across the table and squeezed her hand once firm and brief. The door opened and Caleb came in from outside. He looked at the two of them and read the room immediately, the way he always read rooms, with the quiet precision of a man who paid attention. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is fine," Clara said. She released Lily's hand and picked up her cup. "Sit down, Caleb. I have 3 more opinions about the east fence that I haven't shared yet." He sat down without complaint, and Lily watched her husband endure her sister's opinions about fence management with the steady, patient calm of a man who had decided long ago that the people who mattered were worth the effort they required. She thought, this is it. This is the thing. Not the trust. Not the money. Not the battles they had won. This, a kitchen table in Wyoming, lamplight, her sister's voice, her husband's patience. This was the life. When people asked Lily Bennett, Lily Anderson, now though she used both names, depending on the context and the occasion, how she had come to be the woman she was, she never told it as a story of fortune found. She told it as a story of a choice made. She had chosen to step onto a train with 2 suitcases and a practical plan and a heart that was more open than she had admitted to herself. She had chosen to stay when the choice was hard. She had chosen to be angry when she had the right to be, and to rebuild when it was possible, and to reach across a kitchen table and say the true thing when it needed saying. When women in neighboring counties began coming to her for advice, not financial advice, not legal advice, but the particular kind of advice that women seek from other women when they are trying to understand how to build a life that is genuinely theirs, she always told them the same thing. Find out who a man is when he has nothing to offer you, she said, and then find out who he is when he has everything. The gap between those two is the truth of him. And then she would say, and know yourself in both conditions. Know who you are when you have nothing. Know who you become when you have more. The gap between those two is the truth of you. She knew who she was. She was the woman who had come to Wyoming with 2 suitcases and built something worth keeping. She was the woman who had been angry when she had the right to be, and had not let the anger take the whole house down. She was the woman who had looked at a man with gray, careful eyes and a heart full of things he didn't know how to say, and had said, "I see you. I choose you. Keep going." And she was the woman who had been chosen back, not for what she could offer a struggling ranch, not for what she could manage or endure or provide, but for who she was in the specific daily unperformed way of two people who had stopped hiding from each other. Caleb Anderson was not a perfect man. I was still even now more comfortable with silence than with speech. He still found it easier to show the things that mattered than to say them. He still picked up extra work with his hands when his feelings got too large for him to stand in the same room with. But he was honest. Completely without exception, honest. He had not kept a secret from her since the night the Denver letter arrived. Not one. She would have known she knew him well enough by now to feel the difference between his natural quiet and the loaded quiet of a man carrying something he hadn't decided to share. He had nothing loaded. He was entirely in every room she walked into present. That was the thing she had not known to want when she arrived. She had wanted safety, stability, purpose. She had gotten all of those. But she had also gotten a man who was entirely present, entirely honest, and entirely hers. And she had not known 14 months ago on a train platform in Ohio, with $20 in her coat pocket, that a thing like that was something you could find. She knew it now. On a morning in late May, almost 14 months to the day since she had stepped off the train at Mill Ridge Station with 2 suitcases and a letter that promised her a new beginning, Lily stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her husband cross the yard toward the barn in the early light. He moved the way he always moved, steady, economical, the walk of a man who knew exactly where he was going and was comfortable getting there. He was almost to the barn when he stopped, turned, looked at the house. He saw her in the doorway. They were too far apart to speak without raising their voices, so they didn't speak. He looked at her. She looked back. And in that look across the yard of the ranch they had built together in the early light of a Wyoming spring morning, with the trust documents filed and the work continuing, and Clara's letter from Ohio, due at the end of the week, and 2 ranch hands starting their day, and the east fence finally definitively repaired, in that look was everything that 14 months of real and difficult and chosen life had made possible. He nodded once. She nodded back. He turned and went into the barn. She turned and went back to the stove. And that was it. That was the whole of it. 2 people who had built something real out of a lie, and an anger, and a wooden box, and a land trust, and a $60 payment to a widow, and a set of account books, and the specific daily unheroic practice of choosing each other without ceremony. Lily Bennett had come to Wyoming looking for a beginning. She had found something better than that. She had found the middle, the long, honest, imperfect worth. Everything middle of a life that belonged entirely to her. And she had found the man who stood in it beside her. Not the fortune, not the name, not the inheritance, or the legal victories, or the $2 million in Denver accounts. The man. The one who fixed fences before sunrise and kept secrets because he was afraid of exactly the wrong things, and had learned slowly at real cost in the company of a woman who refused to let him hide that the only thing worth being afraid of was losing what was real. She had married a penniless cowboy. She had discovered his hidden fortune. And she had chosen every single day the man behind both, because the man was the point, had always been the point, and always would be. That was the whole truth of it. And the whole truth was more than enough.